Hi guys, my name is Abby and welcome back to a new video. So I do know that it is getting colder, but I feel like year-round I dress in a very spring-summer vibe and I just shiver through all the cold months, so it's nothing new for me. But I saw this dress online. It was a kimchi blue dress and I loved the style and silhouette of it, but just this video I made, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many years ago now. But it's like a princess poly dress that I really liked, but I wasn't a fan of the colors or the price. And I feel like this is the same kind of vibe where I was like, the colors are okay, but the price for what it is was just not working for me. So I decided that I was going to try and make the dress. And I already had this fabric in my stash that I brought a few years ago that it would be perfect for this. So I decided that I would make this cute fun dress. And, save a little money so I don't keep spending money on more clothes because I can just make them. But I think this is super exciting and I really, really love it. And it's something I want to try to do more often where I see something I like online and I see if I can recreate it and make it myself to help save money, and also that way if there's little things I want to change along the way and I can also make it fit me better. I just think overall it works. It's a lot smarter, more logical to me, and it puts my sewing degree to use. So let's jump right into this video of me making this cute little baby doll dress from Kimchi Blue, but Abby style. After sketching out my pieces, I began with cutting out my bodice. Since I wanted the front part of it to be gathered, I cut it out wider than my front bust and made it one big piece. As for the back of the bodice, I cut out two pieces and then copied these pieces onto a white cotton fabric to be the lining, since the fabric was a bit see-through. Once all my pieces were cut out, I connected the two back pieces to the front for both bodices, so that way I would have two front pieces. After this, I began cutting out the skirt. I wanted it to be gathered at the top and sort of flare out, but I didn't want it to be super full and poofy, so I made sure not to cut out my rectangles to be too wide. I cut out the front on the center fold, and the back I cut out to be two separate pieces so I could put in a zipper on the back. Just like the bodices, the skirt was slightly see-through, so I used the same cotton fabric and cut out all the same pieces again for the skirt lining. Then with both skirts, I connected the back skirt pieces to the skirt front, and then I serged down the side raw edges and the seam allowances to give it a nice clean finish. To gather my pieces, I used a hand sewing needle and hand gathered the pieces myself using a running stitch because I feel so much more comfortable doing it this way rather than using my machine. I gathered the tops of both skirts as well as the top and bottom of the center front piece of my bodice. Next was for the contrasting detail. I chose to use white like the original design for the blue dress, and because I felt like white worked really well with my fabric, I cut out two rectangles, one that was the length of my upper bust and one that was the length of my under bust / waist, and I made sure to make them wide enough to fold them into fourths, so that way they would be thicker and more sturdy. Now, I did originally cut them to be folded and ironed as such, which is first folding them in half and then folding in the raw edges, but then I decided that it would be easier to have them separated, so that way I could tuck in the raw edges for the skirt and the bodice, so I ended up cutting these in half after I ironed them. Taking my waist pieces and my skirt, I placed down the lining skirt and then my fabric skirt on top of it, and then with the waist pieces going on either side of them, kind of sandwiching in the skirts. I made sure to evenly space out the gathers by first matching up the middles of each piece together and then going from there to evenly space it, and this way the raw top edge of the skirts would be tucked into the waist. Once they were connected, I moved on to the bodice and repeated what I did for the skirts by first matching up the middles, and then on the contrasting piece for the top of the bodice, I also matched up where the side seams should be so that I can make sure that the gathers of the bust stopped at those points. And then just like the skirt, I sandwiched in the bust pieces between the top bodice pieces and then sewed them down. Using my iron, I ironed up the seam allowance for both the bodice and the skirts, and I made sure that the raw edges were folded in nicely. Also, I guess like a trigger warning, but before this project, like a month ago, I hemmed some pants for a friend, and I usually iron on top of my lap, and I don't have a problem, but this time, when I went to steam it, the steam hit my leg, and at first I thought nothing of it, but then it turned into this really nasty burn, and it is finally healing now after like a month. But now every time I use my iron, I get so scared that I'm gonna burn myself again. So I'm actually really happy with how much I did end up using my iron for this project. Once everything was nicely pressed, I marked where the side seams were on the top of the waist pieces, and then connected the bottom of the bust pieces to it, making sure that the gather stayed between those two markings since I only wanted it on the front of my bust. I also made sure to only sew it to the front of the waist piece, keeping the back one away for now. I ended up having to take it in a bit of my bodice because I did not like the length of it, but once it was all sewn, I took the back waist piece and pinned it to the lining of the bodice to be dealt with later. Next, I put the backs together and I sewed down the bottom of both skirts that would be beneath the zipper. For the zipper, I made sure that the pieces lined up on both the waist and the top of the bodice pieces, so that way it would not look weird, and then I sewed the zipper down. I then did a rolled hem on both skirts, making sure that the lining skirt was hemmed up enough that it would not peek through the fabric skirt. Back with the hand sewing needle, I did a whip stitch to sew down the inside of the waist, making sure to only sew it to the lining of the bodice, so that way the stitching would not be visible on the front. Now in the original, it looks like the straps tie up into the bow, but I didn't want that, so instead I decided to cut out 2 rectangles that I could fold into fourths to act as my straps, first ironing them as I did with the other pieces, and then I sewed down the open end to make it flat. And then for the bows, I cut out 4 rectangles to fold them into fourths, and I repeated the same ironing as I did before, but this time also ironing on the sides of them, so that way there was no raw edges sticking out anywhere, and then I sewed it down to make them flat. Opening up the top of the bodice, I sandwiched in the straps so that way they would be hidden along the top, and then I stitched down the top of the bodice, securing the straps in. Now originally for the sides, I sewed down the middle of the bow to where the side seam is, so that way they could just be tied up, but I just could not tie them up in a way that looked good because I am so bad at tying up things like that. So I ended up seam ripping them out and just making the bows and hand sewing them on the side. To make the bows, I found the middle of the strap and then folded it as such with them overlapping in the middle, and then using my needle I did a running stitch to connect them, and then I wrapped my thread around that middle part to pull it together and to create a bow shape. Then taking a small rectangle piece of fabric, I folded it around the middle part to cover up the thread and hand stitched it closed. I made 4 bows with the 4 strips that I cut out, with 2 being sewed onto either side of the waist and the other 2 being used for the top of the straps. Now you can sew the bows on top of the straps, but I opted to use safety pins so that way if I decided that I didn't want them, I could take them off, and I also love to use them as hair bows as well, and then with this the dress was complete. I thought it would be fun to do a little side by side of how much the Kimchi blue dress is and how much mine cost me to make. Granted, mine doesn't include like the hours it took to make, But it was really crazy to see the price difference between the two, and I really love how this dress is made for me. It has my own personal touch, so I'm definitely much happier that I made it versus buy it. So now let's see the final reveal of the dress.